In the coldest days of Frostvale, when the winter wind howled like an ancient warning, a single glimmer of light appeared in the snow and changed everything. A young officer stopped his patrol for just one moment, never imagining that this small reflection would lead him to a desperate mother, a fragile litter of pups, and a battle for survival against a storm that refused to show mercy. What forced a woman to walk alone into a raging blizzard? And why did a loyal German shepherd wait in the freezing night, as if guarding a secret only love could explain? Before we begin this journey, tell me where you are watching from. Leave a comment so I can send a warm greeting your way. In winter, Frostvale never simply snowed, it erased. The little mountain town, tucked against a ridge of jagged pines and frozen lakes, was known for storms that swallowed whole weekends. Storms that came down from the northern peaks like ancient spirits shaking loose their white cloaks. That night, as the town huddled behind locked shutters and wood stoves burned until the chimneys glowed red, the storm had reached its fiercest hour. The wind didn't howl. It screamed, dragging curtains of snow across the old ranger road that wound uphill from the edge of town. Elias Carver drove that road with the engine of his patrol truck straining, wipers fighting the storm in jerky, useless arcs. He had been a mountain deputy for 9 years, long enough to know that storms like this turned seconds into stakes. If something or someone was out here tonight, they didn't have minutes to spare. Elias was 36, tall and broad-shouldered, the kind of man whose presence made people assume he had grown up in a forest. His hair, dark blonde and usually neat, was now pushed back in wet curls beneath his beanie, and his beard held bits of frost despite the heater running full. He carried himself with an unmistakable steadiness, something he learned young, growing up as the oldest child in a chaotic family that rarely stayed in one place. His father used to say storms were just the world, reminding humans of their place. Maybe that was why Elias always volunteered for mountain patrols during weather like this. Part duty, part stubbornness, part unspoken respect for the wilderness. Beside him in the passenger seat was K9 Aspen, a 4-year-old Belgian Tervuren with a dark sable coat, intelligent amber eyes, and the restless poise of a creature born for winter terrain. Aspen was a search and rescue dog trained from a pup, precise in temperament, neither overly excited nor timid, a dog who approached the world like a puzzle to solve. He had a thin scar above one eye, the remnant of a past search extrication in which falling debris had nearly blinded him, and the incident had made him more cautious, but also sharper. Elias trusted Aspen more than most people he knew. They were halfway up the ridge when Aspen suddenly stiffened and pressed his nose against the window. Elias slowed the truck, leaning forward. Everything outside was white. White sky, white woods, white road. But then a single glint of light flashed back at him like the wink of a small mirror. He braked immediately, pulling to the side where snow piled high against a wooden rail. "You see it too, buddy?" he murmured. Aspen let out a quiet sound, half woof, half question. Elias grabbed his flashlight and stepped out. The cold stabbed through him instantly. The snow was past his ankles and rising. He pushed forward, light cutting a cone through the storm, until he saw the shape. A wooden post stood near the road's bend, a rescue marker used by rangers and hikers in emergencies. And tied to it, shivering, half buried by drifting snow, was a German shepherd. She looked up at him with eyes both terrified and pleading. The dog, later he would know her name was Maple, was young, maybe 3 or 4, with a sable and cream coat that must have once been soft, but was now clumped with frost. Her ribs quivered with each breath. Her tail curled protectively around small shapes pressed into her belly. Elias crouched, brushing snow aside. 4 puppies lay there, barely old enough to walk, barely old enough to understand cold. Their bodies were rigid, their breaths faint, their fur dusted white. Maple lifted her head, nosing them, then looking back at Elias as if telling him exactly what mattered. She did not growl or flinch. She was thin, exhausted, but her posture, arched downward, legs braced, ears tilted, showed pure maternal instinct. Everything in her had been spent keeping her pups alive. "Hey, girl," Elias whispered, voice softening. "Someone left you here on purpose, didn't they?" The rope tying Maple to the post was not crude or cruel. It was secure but loose enough for her to curl around her pups. It was tied at a height that kept her off the road but still visible to anyone passing. It wasn't abandonment, it was strategy, a desperate attempt by someone who had run out of strength. Elias shone his light around. In the snow, footprints human were half filled by the storm but still visible. Smallish steps, staggered, leading away from the post and deeper into the trees, fresh enough to matter, faint enough to warn him time was running out. Aspen approached Maple with the slow, respectful posture of a trained working dog. Maple, though trembling, didn't bare her teeth. She nosed Aspen's face once, as if recognizing something familiar. Help. Elias checked Maple more closely. Her paws were cracked from cold. Her flank carried a small scrape, maybe from ice or brush, but nothing life-threatening. The puppies were ice-cold but alive. A miracle Elias knew could reverse itself in minutes if he delayed. "Okay," Elias breathed. "We're getting you out of here." He wrapped Maple in his heavy-duty coat, then carefully gathered the puppies into a thick rescue blanket from the truck. Maple whined softly, watching every movement, refusing to blink until her pups were secure. When he lifted them all into the truck, she immediately curled around them, her body instinctively heating theirs. Aspen jumped in beside her, forming an unlikely shield of fur and warmth. Elias sat for a moment, hands gripping the wheel, the storm hammering the truck. Someone had brought Maple and her pups here, someone who knew this was a ranger marker, visible even in storms. Someone who must have been injured or lost or both. His radio crackled uselessly. The storm was interfering again. Elias stared through the windshield, watching the snow racing sideways. He looked at the footprints leading into the trees. "Whoever you are," he said into the storm, "I'm going to find you too." For now, though, he had one priority. Get the dogs warm. Get them alive. As he turned the truck around, Maple rested her head on her pups, but her eyes stayed on the window, as if waiting for someone who hadn't come back yet. The storm swallowed the footprints behind them, but it had also given Elias something unmistakable, a sign, a message left by tired hands and a mother's last strength. Someone had trusted the mountain to deliver help. It had answered by sending him, and the night was far from over. The storm had eased by the time Elias reached the Silver Hollow substation, but only in the way a monster eases when it pauses to breathe. Snow still fell in dense curtains, thick enough to blur the moon and turn the landscape into a shifting canvas of gray and white. The heater in the patrol truck roared as Maple and her puppies huddled together in the back seat, wrapped in blankets, tiny bodies trembling with the fragile rhythm of life returning. Aspen sat upright beside them, keeping watch with the alert patience of a seasoned guardian. When Elias opened the door, the cold rushed in, but Maple rose weakly to meet him, nudging each pup as if counting them. He lifted the puppies one by one into a portable warming crate, then carefully wrapped Maple in his coat to carry her inside. The station's small lobby glowed with amber light from old lamps, giving the space a feeling almost like a hunting lodge. Wooden beams, maps on the walls, and a pot of coffee that tasted as burnt as it smelled. At the front desk sat Deputy Sarah Whitaker. Sarah, in her early 30s, had the kind of sharp features that made her expressions look fiercer than she intended. High cheekbones, wide, alert eyes, and a chin that hardened whenever she concentrated. Her auburn hair was tied back in a tight bun, though wisps had escaped from the long shift she'd already worked. Sarah was compact and athletic, with the posture of someone who took pride in control over herself, over her surroundings, over whatever life tried to throw at her. She had joined the department years earlier after her younger brother had been rescued from a winter accident by a ranger team. Since then, she treated every emergency call like a personal debt she was forever trying to repay. When she saw Maple in Elias's arms, her face changed, hard edges softening, concern sweeping away her usual guardedness. "What happened?" she asked, standing quickly. "Storm rescue?" "Something like that," Elias said. "Found her tied to a ranger marker, 4 pups, all freezing." Sarah's eyes widened. "Tied? Not abandoned?" "No. Whoever left her did it deliberately. She's dehydrated, exhausted, but the knot wasn't cruel. It was smart. Someone wanted her found." As Sarah gathered blankets and warming packs, Elias returned to the truck to retrieve the last item he hadn't opened yet, the metal box. It sat half buried in snow beside the rescue post, wrapped so tightly in layers of nylon that it remained completely dry. Now, under the substation lights, the box looked even stranger, handmade, sturdy, scratched by years of use. Elias cut away the nylon and flipped open the lid. Inside lay a photograph. Sarah leaned in. The picture showed a young woman in her late 20s, tall and slender, with ash-brown hair pulled into a messy ponytail. She held a little girl no older than 5, smiling wide with missing front teeth. Between them sat Maple, healthy, warm, eyes shining with affection. The second item was a folded note. The handwriting was hurried, shaky but readable. "If you find them, please save them. I will come back when I can." Sarah exhaled slowly. Whoever wrote this was desperate. "There's more," Elias said. He lifted the blanket of snow-soaked clothes from the floor of the truck and brought out the pups one by one, setting them into a warming crate beside Maple. There were footprints too, human ones, leading away from the post toward the ridge. Sarah frowned. "You followed them?" "Only for a bit. Storm wiped most of them out. But they were headed toward the direction of that vehicle accident from 3 nights ago." Aspen, hearing the word accident, perked his ears and looked toward the door. He remembered the crash call. He'd been restless the entire night they failed to locate the missing driver. Sarah went to check the incident log at the computer. Minutes later, she returned, her expression grim. "Elias, the missing driver is a woman named Haven Clark, 29 years old. She was traveling with her daughter and her dog. Vehicle overturned during the storm. They found signs she left the crash site on foot." She held up the photo. "This is her, isn't it?" Elias didn't need a second look. The resemblance was unmistakable. "Yes," he said quietly. "And the girl?" "Safe," Sarah said. "Paramedics found her near the crash, half buried under a thermal blanket. Haven must have tucked her there before going for help." A moment of silence hung between them. The pieces fit too well. Haven had walked into the storm, carrying Maple and her pups until she couldn't anymore. She had tied Maple to the rescue post, knowing rangers would pass, then kept going, likely in search of help or a signal. But she had never returned. "She's still out there," Sarah whispered. 3 days, in this weather." "People can survive longer than you think," Elias said, though he knew it was a thin thread of hope, especially when they have something to fight for. He turned to Maple. She had settled into the blankets, her breathing steadier now. Her eyes, rimmed with fatigue, watched them carefully, as if she understood every word. Aspen sat beside her crate, tail curled neatly around his paws, maintaining a quiet vigil. "Before we set out again," Elias said, "I want to sweep the area where we found her one more time, see if the storm exposed anything new." Sarah nodded, already pulling on her coat. "I'll notify search and rescue. They'll want to join." "Not yet," Elias said. "If the winds shift, we'll lose visibility again. Let's check first, then call them to the right coordinates." They stepped outside into the biting cold. Elias secured Aspen's tracking harness and grabbed a flare, just in case. The storm was shifting east now, the clouds thinning enough for the moon to cast a muted glow over the trees. Their boots sank into thick snow as they approached the marker where Maple had been found. Aspen lowered his nose, sniffing slowly, pausing as if replaying the scene. Elias followed the faint indentation of earlier footprints, half erased, but still present beneath the new layer of snow. He crouched, brushing gently until something metallic glinted again. Not the box, something else. A zipper pull, attached to a fragment of nylon. Sarah knelt beside him. "Looks like part of a child's sled harness." Aspen barked once, sharply. He bounded a few feet ahead, nose buried deep, then dug until another item appeared, a small mitten, pink with faded stars, stiff with ice. Sarah's breath caught. "This belongs to the girl." Elias nodded. "Haven must have been carrying the pups in a sled. When it tipped or broke, she moved them under the post and kept going." They both stood, looking out toward the ridge darkening under the storm's returning edge. Aspen looked too, ears forward, muscles tight. Elias felt the same tension coil inside his chest. "She's somewhere close," he murmured. "She has to be." He lifted the mitten, studying it, then glanced back at the station where Maple rested, where her pups fought to survive the night. Haven had chosen the right place to leave them, close to a ranger route, protected by terrain from the worst of the wind. Her choices had kept them alive. Now it was their turn to return that faith. Elias pocketed the mitten carefully. The wind shifted again, sharp and urgent, blowing snow in spirals across the ground like a warning. "Tomorrow at first light," Elias said, "we follow the trail, we find her." Aspen nudged his hand once, as if agreeing. Sarah nodded firmly. Beyond the line of pines, the mountains loomed like giants wrapped in silence. Somewhere in that vast and frozen wilderness, a woman had walked alone, carrying hope she nearly lost, and the night, heavy with snow and unfinished business, seemed to whisper that their story was only beginning. Morning arrived in Frostvale not with sunlight, but with a thinning of the storm. The sky shifted from the oppressive black of night to a muted steel gray, the kind that made everything seem carved from cold metal. The air was still razor sharp, but at least the wind had paused, as if the mountain itself had taken a breath. For Elias, that was enough. He stood outside the substation with Aspen at his side, Maple on a temporary lead clipped to his belt. She moved slowly, still recovering, though her posture was steadier than last night. The pups remained inside the warming crates under Sarah's supervision, each wrapped like tiny embers trying to glow again. Maple kept glancing back at the station door, ears flicking each time a pup cried. A mother's instinct held her heart in place, but something else tugged her forward, an urgency, a direction, a thread she alone could feel. Elias recognized it instantly. "She wants to go," he murmured. "She knows something's missing." Sarah nodded from the doorway, arms crossed against the cold. "Fifth puppy?" "That's what I'm thinking," Elias said. Maple had nursed 4 pups last night, but her restless pacing and occasional soft whining made it clear she was searching for one more. Something left behind, something she refused to forget. With the mitten found at the trail yesterday and the scattered clues of a tipped sled, it made sense. Haven had carried 5 pups, not 4. Somewhere along the path, the smallest must have been placed aside for protection, just as Maple had done at the rescue post. Aspen snorted, eager to begin. The Belgian Tervuren was built for work like this. Lean muscles, thick winter coat, catching snowflakes, tail moving in slow anticipation. Elias clipped the tracking line to Aspen's harness. "All right," he said softly to both dogs. "Lead the way." Maple stepped ahead first, not running, not panicking, just moving with purpose. She paused every few yards to sniff the snow, to tilt her head, to find the scent thread, faint but familiar. Aspen followed beside her, occasionally lowering his nose to confirm what Maple seemed to sense. The 2 dogs worked together with surprising harmony, as if the urgency of the task united them. They traveled uphill along the same direction Elias had traced last night, but now the storm's break allowed more detail to show. Fresh snow lay on top of old tracks, but Maple didn't rely on sight. She relied on memory, on the scent of her pup, on the faint trail of her human's boots. They reached a narrow gulch between 2 pine ridges, a place where the wind tunneled harshly even on calm days. The trees thinned here, revealing a long stretch of white that sloped downward into a natural hollow. Maple paused at the edge, whining low in her throat. Aspen stiffened, tail straight. Elias scanned the hollow. Parts of the snow were uneven, ridges, depressions, subtle lines showing where something had disturbed the surface, before being buried again. "Something happened here," Elias whispered. Maple stepped forward, nose pressed to the ground. She walked in a circle, sniffing, stopping, moving again. Then suddenly, she trotted toward a slight mound near the base of a fallen tree. Aspen bounded after her and began pawing the snow. Elias rushed to them. Aspen barked sharply once, an alert. Elias knelt, brushing snow aside until his glove caught on something smooth. Plastic, a curved edge. He dug faster. A child's sled lay overturned, half filled with ice, its bright blue frame muted by frost. The rope handle was torn, likely pulled too hard during the storm, or snagged on the rocks. Maple pressed her nose into the gap beneath the sled, whining louder now, almost frantic. Aspen backed up slightly, letting her lead. Under the sled, in a shallow pocket of snow that acted as both shelter and trap, was a tiny bundle of fur. Motionless. The 5th puppy. He was the smallest of the litter, his fur a lighter shade than the others, with a faint cream stripe along his neck, barely visible beneath the frost. He wasn't crying. He wasn't moving. Maple nudged him with her nose, soft as breath, then again, harder. The pup didn't react. Elias scooped him up carefully, tucking the tiny body into his coat, pressing him close for warmth. The cold had stiffened the pup's little paws, and his breathing, if it was there at all, was too faint to feel through gloves. Maple let out a broken, helpless sound that pierced Elias more sharply than the storm ever had. "Easy, girl," he murmured. "I've got him. I've got him." Aspen paced in tight circles around them, anxious energy vibrating through his entire body. He knew urgency when he sensed it, and this was urgent. Life hung on threads Elias remembered too well, the same threads he had seen cut in past rescues, the same he had fought to preserve. He rose, pup secured against his chest. "We need to get him back, now." Maple followed so closely she bumped against his leg with every step, as if afraid the pup would vanish if she wasn't touching him. The return trip felt longer, heavier, though their pace was faster. Elias kept one hand over the pup inside his coat, willing warmth into the cold little body. "Hang on," he whispered. "Stay with us." Aspen kept checking on Maple, bumping her shoulder with his head, as if encouraging her to keep moving. They reached the substation just as Sarah swung the door open, worry etched across her face. "You found something?" she called out. "We found him," Elias said, almost breathless. "But he's ice cold." Sarah cleared the table near the warming crates instantly. Elias handed the pup to her, and she worked quickly, wrapping, checking, stimulating his tiny chest with rhythmic motions. Maple pushed in close, her head hovering over Sarah's hands, whining with every breath. And then, a twitch. Barely perceptible, but real. A tiny, shuddering inhale. Maple froze, ears up, tail trembling. Sarah's eyes widened. Again, another breath. Elias exhaled, only now realizing he'd been holding his own. Aspen sat beside Maple, leaning gently against her leg. Snow was still falling lightly outside, whispering against the window panes like ghosts of last night's storm. But inside, in the warmth of the small substation, surrounded by people and animals who refused to give up, the tiniest spark of life fought its way back to light. Maple nudged the blanket again, her eyes shimmering with a fierce, exhausted tenderness. "He's going to need a lot of help," Sarah said softly, "but he has a chance." "He'll make it," Elias said. "He survived the night waiting for us to find him." "That's not an accident." Aspen settled, curling his tail neatly around his paws as if guarding the crate. Outside, the storm shifted again, the wind sighing through the trees, but this time it felt less like a warning and more like a whisper of relief. The missing pup was found. A forgotten little life was pulled back from the silent white. And though the mountain still held secrets Elias hadn't uncovered yet, most of all Haven Clark herself, today, they had saved one small miracle. Tomorrow, they would go after the next. The road to Silver Hollow wound through a valley where snow settled so deeply it softened the world into silence. By midday, the storm had finally begun to fracture, letting weak rays of sunlight fall through the clouds like threads of pale gold. Elias drove carefully, hands steady on the wheel, while Maple, still wrapped in blankets, lay curled in the back seat beside her recovering pups. Aspen sat tall on the passenger side, eyes fixed out the window, ears twitching at each shift of wind. Inside the truck, there was warmth, but also tension, an unspoken weight shaped like the missing woman whose clues now scattered across the mountain. The smallest pup, found under the sled, rested against Elias's coat within a heated pouch Sarah had prepared. His breaths were shallow, but present. Every few minutes, Maple lifted her head to check on him, her dark eyes shining with exhausted devotion. "You're a fighter, little one," Elias murmured, glancing at him with the corner of his eye. "Your mom kept you alive. We'll take it from here." Aspen pressed his nose briefly against Elias's shoulder, a gesture that felt almost like agreement. The veterinary station appeared through the break in the trees, a low wooden building with a pitched roof and smoke curling from its chimney. A carved wooden sign hung near the door, partly covered in snow. Silver Hollow Animal Clinic, Dr. Briar Hayes. Elias parked and carried the smallest pup inside first. The warmth inside hit him immediately. a comforting blend of cedar wood, antiseptic, and the faint, earthy smell of animals. The interior had the rustic charm of a mountain lodge, decorated with landscape photos and handmade blankets donated by townsfolk. Dr. Briar Hayes stood near the counter examining a patient file. In her 40s, Briar had the calm steadiness of someone who had spent her life patching wounds and soothing frightened creatures. She was tall and willow-thin, with long dark hair streaked in silver and tied loosely at her back. Years of mountain living had carved faint lines around her eyes, lines formed not by age alone, but by compassion. She looked up as soon as Elias entered. "Tell me you didn't bring me something frozen again," she said with a tired half-smile, an expression familiar to everyone who'd ever worked winter rescue with her. "I did," Elias said. 5 somethings, actually." Briar blinked. 5? "Come see." He held out the smallest pup. Briar's brows knit as she gently took the bundle and opened the warming cloth. Her breath caught. "Good heavens! He's barely responding." "We found him under a sled," Elias said. "The others are in the truck, their mom too." Briar moved quickly, placing the pup in a neonatal warming box, adjusting the temperature and oxygen vent. "Go get the rest," she ordered without looking up. "And hurry, those pups don't have hours to spare." Elias returned to the truck with Aspen at his side. Maple's ears perked when she saw him, her tail thumping weakly. He lifted the crate of pups, then helped Maple out, supporting her weight as she limped into the clinic. "You're safe now, girl," he whispered. Briar met them at the door. "Set them here," she said, pointing to a padded table. She worked with controlled urgency, checking vitals, massaging stiff paws, warming bellies with practiced hands. "They're hypothermic but responsive," Briar said after a few minutes. "If they stay warm and start feeding soon, they'll make it." Maple pushed her nose to each pup, checking for herself. When she reached the smallest, still in the warming box, she let out a low, soft whine. Briar shook her head gently. "He's fighting harder than any of them, but he'll need more time." Aspen sat at Maple's side, quiet as a shadow. Elias finally felt his shoulders loosen. Relief didn't flood him. It crept in carefully, like someone afraid to disturb the fragile moment. The pups were stable. Maple was alive. Now came the harder part. Sarah arrived, carrying a printed email. "Elias," she said, "you need to hear this." She handed him the paper. The message was from the sheriff's office in the neighboring county. A new update. Missing person, Haven Clark. Last confirmed sighting. 3 days ago. Vehicle overturned on Forest Road 17B. No communications. Believed to be traveling on foot, maybe injured, cold exposure likely. Beneath the text was the same photograph they found in the metal box. Haven with her little girl and Maple. And below it, still missing. Elias's stomach tightened. Briar glanced at the photo and let out a slow breath. "So, this is her," she murmured. "She looks young to be going through something like this." "She's 29, Sarah said quietly. "Mother of 1. Maple looked up from her pups at the sound of voices. Her ears perked. She stared at the photo, as if recognizing the woman instantly. Briar noticed. "She knows," the vet said softly. "Dogs always know." Sarah pointed to the metal box on the counter. "The photo came from that. We found it wrapped in nylon near the ranger post where Maple was tied." Briar studied the box. "Wrapped to keep it dry. Someone cared about the message being found." Elias nodded. "She wanted someone to save the dogs. The note said she would come back when she could." Briar sighed. "But she didn't come back." Sarah added. "The accident wasn't far from where Elias found the dogs. If Haven left the crash site to look for help, she may have pushed herself until she collapsed." A chilling thought passed between them all, a silent recognition of time lost, of cold endured. Aspen suddenly gave a low growl, not a warning, but a sound of restlessness. He paced toward the door, then back to Elias, tail stiff. His instincts were rarely wrong. Something was still out there, unfinished. Maple lifted her head too, watching Aspen. The faint lift of her ears suggested the same thing. A thread remained untied. A person remained unfound. Elias looked at both dogs, the experienced canine, the devoted mother, and the message in their eyes was unmistakable. "Once the weather clears," he said, We go back out. We follow the direction she walked after tying Maple at the marker. Sarah nodded. We'll expand the search radius from the crash site, foot patrols, drones if the wind settles, rescue teams from the next county. Briar placed a gentle hand on Maple's fur. Take her with you when she's strong enough. She'll know where Haven went. Elias leaned on the counter, staring at the photo again. The smiling woman, her small daughter holding Maple, the bright life that seemed worlds away from the frozen mountains outside. She fought to save them, he said. We owe it to her to fight just as hard to bring her home. Maple nudged his hand, resting her head against him with quiet trust. Outside, the sky was beginning to brighten in thin streaks of silver, but the light felt different now, less like winter's harsh glow, more like the fragile hope of something still possible. The dogs were safe. The clues were aligning. And somewhere beyond the snow-laden ridges, Haven Clark was waiting, whether she still had the strength to move or not. Elias looked at Aspen and Maple again. We find her, he said, no matter what. The storm had taken much, but it had also left a trail that had finally begun to make sense. The search would start soon, and for the first time since the storm began, there was a sense that the mountain was no longer hiding its secrets, it was inviting them to uncover them. The next morning was the kind of winter dawn that looked fragile enough to shatter. Frostvale lay under a muted sky of pale gray, and the snow, though no longer falling, drifted softly in the breeze, as if the storm refused to fully loosen its grip. Elias stood outside the Silver Hollow Veterinary Station with Aspen and Maple, preparing for the next stage of the search. The pups remained inside under Briar's care, growing stronger by the hour. Maple had regained enough strength to stand without shaking, her posture steadier, her eyes clearer, though exhaustion still lingered beneath her calm. But something else burned beneath that tired surface. Determination. Aspen moved beside her with the focused readiness of a trained canine, the steady rise and fall of his breath visible against the frigid morning air. Sarah arrived in the sheriff's SUV, stepping out with maps and a thermal drone kit in her arms. Search teams are on standby, she said. We'll start by expanding from the crash site toward the gulch. That seems the most likely direction Haven took. Elias nodded. We'll track from the rescue post again. Maple can guide us from there. Maple lifted her head at her name, ears pricking as if she understood the responsibility waiting for her. They began at the ranger marker, now a lonely sentinel half buried in snow. Aspen sniffed the ground once, then twice, then let out a low huff. Maple moved past him, head lowered, tail stiff. She walked slowly but with purpose, following a faint trail of scent carried through the trees. Her nose brushed the air, tracking something older than a day, older than two, a path carved by desperation, fear, and love. The trail led them deeper into Frostvale's forest, the towering pines closing in like silent witnesses. The snow here was softer, less disturbed by wind, showing old prints that were shallow and nearly erased, footsteps too small to belong to Elias or another adult, but just right for Haven's stride. She was heading north, Sarah murmured, comparing the coordinates to her map. Toward the ridge. There's an old cabin near there, Elias said. Used to be a hunting shelter before the Forest Service closed it down. If she needed warmth, shelter, anything, she might have aimed for it. Maple stopped suddenly, sniffing the air. Her muscles stiffened, tail lifted. Aspen responded instantly, nose to the ground, tracing an invisible path. They've got something, Elias said. Let's move. The ascent up the ridge was slow, the snow deep, the cold biting through layers of gear, but the dogs pressed on. Aspen trotted with renewed urgency while Maple followed close behind, sometimes overtaking him, driven by instinct no training could match. Halfway up, the trees parted just enough to reveal a faint structure ahead, weather-worn, tilted. The old hunting cabin. There, Sarah whispered, though no one had spoken loudly enough to need whispering. Woodstall's cabin looked abandoned, its roof caved slightly on one side, its door hanging unevenly. Snow had drifted across the entrance, and icicles clung to the eaves like frozen claws. Aspen approached first, ears up, scanning for danger. Maple followed, but as they reached the doorway, something changed in her completely. Her tail began to wag, slowly at first, then urgently. She whined, pawing at the door. Elias pushed the door open. Inside, the cabin was dim, lit only by weak daylight seeping through broken slats. A faint smell of smoke lingered, the kind from a makeshift fire built days earlier. And there, huddled against the far wall, wrapped in a torn emergency blanket, was Haven Clark. She was barely conscious. Her long ash-brown hair hung tangled across her face, her cheeks hollowed by cold and hunger. The edges of her lips were cracked. Her hands trembled where they clutched the blanket. She stirred at the sound of the door, trying to sit upright, but failing. "Maple!" Her voice was barely a whisper, thin, fragile, like ice about to break. Maple bounded forward with a sudden burst of strength no one expected. She went straight to Haven, pressing her head into her lap, whining urgently. Haven's trembling hands rose weakly to touch Maple's fur. The dam of exhaustion and fear broke, and she began to cry. Quiet tears, choked sobs, the sound of a heart that had held on longer than it believed possible. You made it," she whispered. "You found them." Elias knelt beside her, checking her pulse, her breathing, the waxy texture of her skin. "Haven, my name is Elias Carver," he said gently. "We found Maple and the pups. They're safe at the veterinary station." Haven let out a broken exhale, part relief, part disbelief. Thank God. Sarah stepped closer, offering a thermal blanket and water. "Haven, can you tell us what happened?" Haven clutched the blanket, her fingers raw from cold. "The car, it flipped. The storm came so fast, I could barely see the road." She swallowed hard. "My phone was dead. I couldn't carry everything at once. My daughter, she was closer to the road. I put a thermal blanket on her and prayed someone would find her soon." She blinked through tears. "But Maple, and the puppies, they were too small, too cold. I knew they needed help." Her lips quivered. "So I picked them up, all of them, carried them as far as I could. When I found the rescue marker, I knew hikers and rangers used it. People would pass there, so I tied Maple to the post." Her breath faltered. "I thought she'd bark, that someone would find her, and the pups." She paused, tears streaking down her face. "I kept losing feeling in my hands. I dropped the sled at some point. I had to hide the smallest one under it so the wind wouldn't take him." Maple nudged her again, licking her cheek. Haven closed her eyes, leaning into the warmth. "I wanted to go back for him, but I couldn't keep going." Elias placed a hand on her shoulder, steady, reassuring. "Haven, you kept them alive, all of them, even the smallest. We found him. He's weak, but he's fighting." Haven's face broke into a mixture of relief and agony. She covered her mouth with a trembling hand. Aspen settled beside Maple, the two dogs forming a silent circle of warmth around Haven. Elias and Sarah worked quickly, wrapping Haven in additional blankets, checking her vitals, preparing her for transport. "You're going to be okay," Sarah murmured. "We'll get you to warmth, food, a hospital." Haven nodded weakly, leaning into Maple. "I knew she'd survive. Maple, she's stronger than me." Elias shook his head. "No, you're both strong. You both made choices that saved lives." Maple stayed pressed against Haven, tail moving slowly with relief. Outside, the wind whispered across the ridge, scattering loose snowflakes into the air. But inside the cabin, warmth returned, not from fire, but from reunion, from loyalty, from the simple miracle of a mother found seconds before the mountain claimed her. Elias looked at the scene, Maple curled around Haven, Aspen standing guard, Sarah prepping the emergency gear, and felt the weight of the search lift from his shoulders. They had found her. Haven Clark was alive. The storm had challenged them, tested them, misled them, but it had not claimed her. And now they would bring her home. Weeks passed, and the mountains of Frostvale slowly softened beneath the late winter light. The great storm that had once swallowed the valley and nearly erased a family had long since drifted into memory, but traces of it lingered in the pale blue shadows cast by snowdrifts and the crisp bite of the morning air. It was a quieter winter now, gentler, as if the storm had spent all its fury that night and left behind only a hush. Elias drove up the same narrow road that had once led him into chaos and cold. Today, it felt transformed. The trees glittered beneath a thin sheet of ice, the branches bending with slow grace instead of trembling under violent winds. The sun filtered through in soft, golden beams that made the world look like it had been polished overnight. Aspen was in the back seat, tail thumping against the crate he shared with a new set of tracking gear. He had recovered from the long days of search work, and now he looked eager, as if sensing this visit was different, lighter, peaceful. Elias parked in front of a cozy cabin nestled at the edge of the forest. Smoke curled up from the stone chimney, and soft laughter echoed faintly from the fenced yard behind the house. He smiled. It hadn't been long since the rescue, but seeing Hope restored so fully always gave him a quiet sense of awe. When he stepped out of the truck, the chill touched his face like a gentle hand instead of a blade. He closed the door behind him and followed the sound of laughter around the house. What he saw made him pause. The yard was blanketed with soft snow, disturbed only by the chaotic trails of small paws zigzagging like playful stitches across the ground. 5 puppies, once fragile breaths on the edge of life, now tumbled over each other in a flurry of clumsy joy. They were plump, bright-eyed, their fur thick and shining with health. One tugged at the edge of a wool mitten, growling in what he probably believed was a fearsome display of strength. Another rolled onto his back, paws waving in the air. Aspen chuffed a greeting, and the pups immediately froze, then scrambled toward him in a wave of excited yips. Aspen tolerated them with stoic dignity, though his tail betrayed him by swishing back and forth. And then Maple appeared from the side of the yard. She walked with a restored confidence, still lean, still bearing subtle marks of the ordeal, but her eyes were bright, her step steady. She paused when she saw Elias, her ears rising, tail swaying. Elias stepped forward, crouching. "Hey, girl," he said softly. Maple crossed the distance between them and pressed her head firmly into his palm. It was not dramatic, not frantic, just a simple, powerful gesture of recognition and gratitude. She stayed there, leaning her weight into him, breathing slow and steady. "I missed you too," Elias murmured, running his hand gently behind her ears. "You did good. You saved them all." Maple closed her eyes, as if the words sank deep into a place that had carried too much burden for too long. Footsteps approached from the cabin porch. Haven Clark walked toward him, bundled in a thick wool coat, cheeks pink from the cold. The exhaustion that once pulled down her features had faded, replaced now by a quiet radiance. Her ash-brown hair fell neatly down her shoulders, no longer tangled by the storm. There was still a faint frailty in her posture, a reminder of what she had endured, but she moved with purpose, with renewed life. "Elias," she greeted warmly, "I was hoping you'd stop by." "Had to check on my favorite patients," he said, watching the pups wrestle in the snow. Haven laughed softly. "They're getting bolder every day. That little one—" She pointed at the smallest pup, now climbing Aspen like a tiny mountaineer. "He's determined to prove he's as strong as the others." Elias smiled. "He survived the worst cold I've ever seen in a pup. He's earned the right to be stubborn." Haven moved closer, her gaze warm. "You know, not a day passes that I don't think about what you did, what Aspen and Maple did. I don't have words for it." Elias shook his head. "You saved them first. You did everything right." Haven's eyes softened, shimmering with emotion held carefully in place. "I tried, but without you, without Aspen, without Maple, none of us would be standing here." Maple seemed to sense the quiet shift in Haven's tone. She stepped between them, leaning into Haven's leg and looking between the two humans as if making sure they understood what she already knew, that survival had been a shared effort, each heart carrying its part. "Come," Haven said, gesturing toward a wooden post near the edge of the property. "I want to show you something." Elias followed her to a small clearing where the snow had been swept aside to reveal a newly carved sign staked into the ground. "Frostvale Rescue Marker for those who need hope." The simple words were enough to pull the breath from his chest. It was the same kind of post where Maple had once been tied, abandoned but not forgotten, left with the hope that someone would find her before the storm took everything. Haven touched the wooden sign gently. "This is the exact height of the real marker," she said quietly. "I wanted a reminder, not of the fear, but of the moment everything changed." Elias nodded slowly, feeling the weight of that memory settle around them like a soft snowfall. Sometimes, Haven continued. I think about how fate works, how one decision, one step, one passing vehicle can rewrite an entire story. She looked at Maple. She never gave up on me. Maple's tail brushed the snow lightly as she sat beside Haven, eyes bright with a calm loyalty that needed no explanation. The puppies tumbled around them, yipping and chasing each other, weaving chaos through the stillness. Their tiny paw prints crossed over the larger tracks in the snow, layers of past and present written side by side. Elias watched the scene quietly. Something about it felt sacred, as if the mountain itself had opened a doorway between despair and blessing, letting them step through together. After a long moment, Haven turned to him with a soft smile. Elias, thank you for every step you took that day, for not giving up when the trail disappeared. I didn't do it alone, he said, glancing at Aspen and Maple. Every heart helped in its own way. Haven nodded. Then maybe that's how people survive winters like that. Not by being strong alone, but by finding the right hands, the right hearts, at the right time. Maple placed her head in Elias's palm again, as if sealing the truth of those words. A breeze rippled through the pines, carrying the soft echo of puppy barks and the warmth of a life reclaimed. Winter, for all its harshness, had opened a path, and the family standing in the snow, a woman, her brave dog, her 5 spirited pups, was living proof of what can endure. Elias straightened slowly, giving Maple one last scratch between her ears. You've got a good family, girl, he whispered. Look after them. Haven smiled. She always does. The mountains shimmered under the pale winter sun, and for the first time since the storm began, Frostvale felt still. Not frozen, but peaceful. A peace that had been earned. A peace carried forward by every life saved. Elias took a final look at Maple, Haven, and the small, chaotic cloud of puppies racing in circles. Then he turned back toward his truck, Aspen trotting faithfully at his side, tales of their footprints trailing behind them like threads of a story finally woven into something whole. Sometimes God's miracles do not arrive with thunder or bright light. Sometimes they come quietly through a loyal dog who refuses to give up, through a stranger who chooses compassion, or through the strength God places in our hearts when we think we have none left. This story reminds us that even in the coldest seasons of our lives, God never leaves us alone. He guides our steps, protects our families, and sends help in ways we do not expect. In our everyday lives, we face storms of our own, moments of fear or loneliness when hope feels far away. But faith teaches us that God still works in the details. He still opens paths, and He still rescues us in His time. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs encouragement. Leave a comment to tell us your thoughts, and remember to subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and love. May God bless you and your family with peace and protection. And if you believe in the quiet miracles He gives us, type Amen in the comments.